Joe Ingles, the most kind and thoughtful guy in the NBA.
Wow.
Oh, man.
Ingles went right at Allen. I mean, you mean to tell me that's...
Okay, maybe not the NBA, but certainly the most kindest guy in the Western Conference.
Control that time, though.
Boy, I tell you, you got Paul George coming at you. Listen.
Okay, what about the Utah Jazz?
He's your guy.
I still don't like you. I never have, never will.
How you doing?
Okay, scrap that. Joe Ingles isn't the most kind and thoughtful guy in the NBA. In fact, for most people, he's probably the complete opposite. If you ask anyone that isn't Australian or supports the Utah Jazz about Joe, you'll hear dirty, not talented, and disgrace of basketball. And something tells me if Joe heard that, he would have the widest grin on his face. Joe Ingles is a pest, and he wears that with a badge of honour. Now, it may seem like I'm bagging out Joe here, but I actually love this man. In many sporting teams, particularly in Australia, you always need a pest to get under the skin of the opponent's best players. And to have a balding, middle-aged, dopey looking dude be that guy, but on the world stage, it just makes him more lovable to us. So today, rather than taking the piss out of Joe, I want to celebrate his career so far. Not just in the NBA, but all the way back to when he was just a young fella playing basketball in Adelaide. So sit back, relax, and listen, as today, TA Sports brings to you the story of Joe Ingles, the NBA's pest. Joe Ingles was born in Happey Valley, a suburb in the capital city of South Australia, Adelaide, on the 2nd of October 1987, to parents Tim and Lynn Ingles. Growing up, Joe loved all sports, particularly Aussie rules, cricket, and basketball, but ultimately, it was basketball that he took most interest in, and in the end, I don't think he made a bad choice. Growing up in Adelaide, his two basketball goals was to play for the Adelaide 36ers in the National Basketball League of Australia, and play for the Australian Boomers. In fact, his main basketball idol growing up was Brett Maher, who achieved both of those feats. Although it had gone to say that his main NBA idols were Dirk Nowitzki and Manu Ginobili. At the age of 16, it was time for Joe to move on to bigger and better things from Adelaide, and move to the capital city of Australia to be developed by the AIS. For those not familiar with the AIS program, the Australian Institute of Sport, it's where top junior athletes from all sports around the country go to refine and grow their skills to help them achieve global success on a sporting level. The Institute is responsible for bringing up majority of the Australian Boomer squad and has a world-class basketball program. It's also developed the likes of Lauren Jackson, Ricky Ponting, Mark Viduka, and obviously, Joe Ingles. Joe would be up against some of the best basketball talent in the country and be in daily battles with guys like Patty Mills. After a 2-year stay in the AIS program, Ingles was given the decision to either try college out and go up against some of the best talent the US has to offer, or go professional in Australia, and ultimately, he chose the latter. As a 17-year-old, Ingles would sign with newly introduced expansion side, the South Dragons, playing out of Melbourne. Joe would later on make his debut just after his 18th birthday, heading to New Zealand for the team's first ever game. Ingles would go on to break records straight away, being the highest scoring Australian in a debut, scoring 29 points on 11 from 15 shooting, in a game that they would ultimately end up losing. Although Joe Ingles would end up winning Rookie of the Year honours, his team didn't have much success in his first season. After losing their first 5 games in a row, their head coach, former NBA All-Star Mark Price, would leave the team, having Captain Shane Hill step in to fill the role. Ingles would finish his first professional season with averages of 15.3 points, 4.9 rebounds, and 3.0 assists. In Ingles' second season, he produced much the same averages of 15.4 points, 6.3 rebounds, and 4.9 assists. However, his team would ultimately end up with a worse record than the year before, winning only 5 games out of the 30. But the third season was a big turnaround for the team. South Dragons hired then former Sydney Kings coach and future Boomers coach, Brian Goorjian. With a couple of extra signings, Goorjian bought the 13th place team and brought them all the way to the minor premiership and eventual champions of the NBL, with Joe playing a large role. Although his numbers took a little dip, he was recognised as a key player and ended the season with 13.1 points, 4.1 rebounds, and 3.4 assists, and received his first and only All-NBL selection, being put in the third team. Unfortunately for the South Dragons, they would end up folding after this season due to financial reasons, which meant Joe was now without a team. With Ingles now without a team, he decided to take this opportunity and declare for the NBA draft. Unfortunately for Joe, he wasn't high on any team's draft boards, as his stats really didn't stand out from an NBA's perspective. And in the little workouts that he did around NBA GMs, he just underperformed. Most saying the talent was there, but it just didn't look like he could translate to the NBA level. But this didn't mean he wasn't given a chance. In the 2009 Summer League, the Golden State Warriors gave him a chance to showcase his talents. That's right, Golden State Warriors 2009 Summer League team had the greatest 3-point shooter of all time, and Steph Curry, on the same team. But Joe's light wasn't ready to shine just yet, as he only averaged 3 points, 4 rebounds, and 1 assist, while averaging around 25 minutes. It was after the Summer League that Joe would take his talents to the Spanish League team, Granada. Joe would go on to have 2 solid seasons at Granada, averaging 12 points per game, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, and 1.5 steals. But his efforts wouldn't help him stay in this top Spanish league, and were relegated to the B League. Soon after, they would fold altogether, and once again, Joe was on the move. This time, to Spanish League giants, Barcelona. In November 2010, Joe Ingles would officially make his move to Barcelona, signing a 3-year deal. It was at Barcelona that Ingles finally had some consistency within the team and his role was established. Joe was a key role player for the Spanish Giants as a spot-up 3-point shooter, and in his first season would average 6 points on 45% shooting from deep. Although his stats at Barcelona don't jump off at you, he was an integral part of the team and helped Barca in winning 2 Spanish League titles and 2 Spanish Super Cups. He was a guy that could do a bit of it all. But ultimately, after his contract, he was offered a practice deal with Memphis Grizzlies. But he would ultimately decline for a guaranteed spot with Israeli giants Maccabi Tel Aviv. Ingles arrived at Maccabi Tel Aviv with soon-to-be NBA head coach David Blatt at the helm. When Ingles first arrived in Israel, he received plenty of minutes and put up many great performances. But due to players coming back from injury and Blatt already having a preferred team, Ingles' minutes decreased further and further as the season went on. Although there would be Israeli champions and also EuroLeague champions, Ingles' minutes decreased to a point where in the EuroLeague decider, he got 7 minutes, 1 rebound, and 1 turnover. After the season, where he averaged 7 points, 3 rebounds, and 3 assists, he felt like he was finally ready to take on the NBA. This time around coming back to the NBA, he was more mature, teams knew his play style, and what he could bring to a team. Plus, having a veteran presence as a rookie seems like a little bonus too. It was the Los Angeles Clippers that originally took a chance on him. However, after training camp and 5 preseason games where he averaged 1 point, 1 rebound, and an assist, they had to cut him due to an injury to their backup guard Jordan Farmer, and ended up signing Jared Cunningham instead. Clippers didn't want to make this move either. Head coach Doc Rivers didn't want to make it. The players didn't want it. However, the hand was forced and were trying to work out a way to sign him off waivers, until another team stepped in, the Utah Jazz. Now, Utah at the time had recently just picked up another Australian, the 5th pick in the 2014 NBA draft, Dante Exum. It seemed like this move was put in place maybe to ease Exum into a professional environment and have someone with a familiar Australian accent. Well, for whatever reason they did sign Joe for, they definitely got more out of him than they were expecting. Each year at Utah, his role has grown more and more, and even at the age of 34, he's still putting in decent minutes and impacting the team positively. His rookie season, he'd gone to average 5 points, 2 rebounds, and 2 assists, and would surprise people with his defensive ability, and just straight up basketball IQ. And I don't want to undersell his stats either, because ever since he's moved into the NBA, his box score stats have taken a massive improvement. Over his career in the NBA, he's averaged close to 9 points per game, 3 rebounds, and close to 4 assists, while shooting above 40% deep in his career. But what made him start to make more of a name for himself, especially the longer he was in the league, was his ability to get under people's skin. A grade A, Pest. Just type in Joe Ingles versus and look at the plethora of names that come down the screen, or even the ones that the engine doesn't find. There's no doubt that his ability definitely came from his time in Australia, as any team in any sport here will have that one person whose role is to get under the star player's skin. And talking about Australia, let's look at his international career. Ingles' first taste of the international scene came in the 2008 Olympics. Ingles at the time was still quite young, at about 21 years of age, and had a much more diminished role. However, he left his best performance against the USA, where he was able to get 11 points on 100% shooting. Take that, LeBron. In a 116-85 loss that would end their tournament. His role would eventually grow into a much bigger role when it came around to his next international tournament, at the FIBA World Cup. It was here that it would average a team-high 28 minutes to go along with 10 points, 3 rebounds, and 2 assists, and almost 2 steals. In what was an undermanned Australian squad, they would eventually lose to Slovenia and end their tournament. The 2012 Olympic Games had much more promise. Patty Mills was balling out more than ever. Newcomer Matthew Dellavedova was inserted into the team, and Joe Ingles would find his role that would become all too familiar with today. Joe, in the London Olympics, would average 15 points per game, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists. That would be the highest amount of points for Joe in an international competition. However, like always, Australia were no match for the eventual gold medalist, USA. The 2014 World Cup was a miss year for the Boomers, once again as they were missing star players Patty Mills and Andrew Bogut. Joe tried his best, averaging 11 points, but it just was never meant to be that year. 2016 Olympics were meant to be the Boomers' year to finally medal. It was the last Olympics that Andrew Bogut and David Anderson, two guys that have been an integral part of the Boomers international tournaments, and Australia were only one win away from achieving that. Actually, they almost are set up with the USA in the gold medal game. However, a disappointing game against Serbia, who Boomers had a win over in the group stage, meant they would face up against Spain for the bronze medal. Boomers were so close to winning that elusive medal, but a clear missed call on Paddy Mills to get the lead in the game was missed, and Spain would eventually become winners. Joe would have a disappointing tournament, averaging almost 8 points, 3 rebounds, and 3 steals, shooting 16% from deep. Much of the same luck when the 2019 World Cup. They would win every game except the semi-final and the bronze medal match, losing to Spain and France respectively. The 2020 Olympic Games was the year that the Boomers were convinced they would get over the hump, and with Joe and Paddy Mills being the leaders on the team, they had aspirations for gold. This was the most talented Australian squad in a long time, with 7 guys having played in the NBA and an extra who would make his debut the next season. They cleaned up the group stage quite convincingly and dominated Argentina in the quarters, which matched them up with a weak USA side. The Boomers had the US number in the last 2 games they played them too, and even had a 15-point lead, but that would eventually fold and lose 97-78, which meant that once again, for the 3rd time in a row, the Boomers would be fighting for the bronze medal. But this time, the Boomers came prepared. They would win over the hot Slovenia, with one of the superstars in the NBA and Luka Doncic. With the masterclass by Paddy Mills, with Joe right beside him, Australia would win the first medal in an international basketball tournament. Joe in this tournament would finish with 11 points per game, 5 rebounds and 4 assists, and a nice shiny bronze medal. Now I can finish off the story right here, but I'd be missing one important part of Joe's life that doesn't come on the basketball court, and that's his advocacy. Joe and partner Renee, who herself is a well-renowned netball player, got the devastating news that their son Jacob at 2 years old was diagnosed with autism. Rather than just sit with it or fight with the battle in private, Joe and his family took it upon themselves to advocate for children with autism and share awareness through a variety of programs, charities, and even got the Utah Jazz to host an annual Autism Awareness Night, where they raise money for local autism charities. So not only is Joe a great basketball player, but he's a great person, and although some may get caught up in his basketball antics, he's a much beloved player on and off the court, and are loved by fans in Utah, Australia, and all around the world. Like always, thanks for watching. If you'd like to see any other stories of great basketball players, click one of these videos right in front of you. Like this video and subscribe to this channel, it would mean so much. Cheers, and have a good one.